going to just walk through some introduction on ways to prepare a plan to draft your proposal. If you're here and you already have your proposal drafted, you can stick around. We're going to be talking about some revising and editing and proofreading, some things that will be helpful to you as well. Um, we have a poll that we're getting ready to launch. Dr. Sandoval is going to go ahead and do that now. It consists of about 5 or 6 questions that you can choose from. So, Dr. Sandoval, if you can go ahead and launch that for me. Antoinette, I see you saying hello, 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 and good evening to you as well. And again, we'll get started here in a couple minutes. I do have a few colleagues here with me. Again, Dr. Sandoval, Dr. Rudy Garcia, and Dr. Linda Garrett. They are going to be here to help me man the chat because we'll know this will be full of questions. You can also use the Q&A feature of this webinar to ask questions there. I believe we may have some other folks here from our office in a little bit, but they are here to make sure that you are all supported. So about 1 more minute and then we'll get started just to make sure that we are not taking up too much unnecessary time, but making sure this is valuable for you. So welcome to everybody who is here. All right, so that was a quick 1 minute. It is now 4 o'clock. So again, my name is Dr. Tarila Johnson. I am one of 4 research faculty managers with the Office of Dissertations. We do have one of our dissertation program chairs here, Dr. Michelle Sandoval. Thank you for being here. We also have 2 of my colleagues here, Dr. Linda Garrett and Dr. Rudy Garcia. They are going to actually man the chat, like I just said, and also answer any questions that you may have. These webinars will be going on a weekly basis. My colleagues, you'll see them presenting going forward, but you'll get them on a weekly basis on Wednesdays at 4 p.m. Arizona time. There'll be a bunch of different topics. So feel free to invite other learners. I'm glad you all are here. So just to kick things off, we're going to get things going. So this is all about planning to draft that proposal. So I don't know if you guys are like me, but transitioning from the prospectus to the proposal was not an easy feat. I did have a draft, but that soon shifted and I had to do some revising, but I did a pretty good job of documenting how I did it. So what you'll see here is some approaches that I used and that I picked up from a lot of faculty as well as other students in my role along the way. This is not a one size fit all way to do it. This is just one way to do it, but hopefully the different things that I provide here and techniques can be useful to you all. And again, this is about drafting the proposal. But like I said before, if you are here and you already have one drafted, stick around because I am going to talk about revising, editing, as well as proofreading. All right. So our agenda, give me 2 seconds here, my mouse. Our agenda, we just did it. We just did a pre-webinar poll just to kind of assess where you are before you get this knowledge. And then next, we're going to talk about how to use the template to design logical sections for your proposal. And then we're going to talk about how to assess the rubric criterion. So it's not a good idea to just go at writing it blindly. You actually need to slow down a little bit and actually look at what the rubric criterion is actually asking you for and assess how well you actually know what's in there and how you can put your best foot forward with that. And then we're also going to talk about how to use the template to draft and revise. So GCU spoiled us. I'm telling you, as a GCU student and being faculty, we are spoiled. They literally gave us just about everything we need, but that doesn't mean that we don't have a hard time figuring out how we're going to use that. And so that's what I'm going to go through here. And then pre-writing. This is something we don't think about. We just want to sit down as the student and we just want to write. But The writing process also includes pre-writing. So I'm going to cover that a little bit. And one of the primary ways is using an outline. Then I'll give a few writing tips. So I'm going to talk about 2 ways to draft a logical paragraph and your sections. And then I'm going to talk about how to use the outline, not only to draft, but also to revise and edit. Super helpful for me, and actually made my revisions a lot more efficient and effective. And I'll go through that in a little bit. And then one thing we don't hear a whole lot about, but we see it in some of the curriculum that we've been given, also the template, and that's signposting. So I'll talk about that a little bit more in just a little bit. And then next, some things on proofreading, revising, and editing for logical paragraph and sentence structure. You guys have no idea how important this is, but you also know too, in each section at the end of the rubric criteria, that is one of the things that you assess yourself on. Your chair is assessing you on that, as well as your committee members. And then we're going to do a little Q&A. You can ask questions throughout all of this. We now have Dr. Waldschmidt here. So now you have 4 people that are here to answer your questions the best way that they can, and then a post-webinar poll. I do want to throw out a disclaimer. If there is something very specific to your committee and something that your chair is better off addressing, each of the doctors here are going to tell you that. They're going to say, go back to your chair. If there's some things that are more student services related, if those things come up, they're going to say, talk to your student services counselor. Keep in mind, everything here is all about drafting the proposal. All right. So we already went through that poll. Dr. Sandoval already put that out. Dr. Sandoval, I don't know if you want to repost it, if that's possible for folks that join.
It's still open. And so if you're just joining us, you can still participate in the poll. I am going to shut it down soon so that we can focus on the webinar. So if you haven't yet, please answer. This information will really help us with targeting future webinars as well.
Thank you very, very much. All right, so let's get rolling here. So you guys, what you see here is I took the rubric criteria from the identification of the problem space section. And pretty much what you see here is it says Roman numeral 2 because that's the second section in chapter 2 of your proposal. That's why it says Roman numeral 2. If you were to start doing this, which I recommend that you do, you would start with the introduction, and that would be Roman numeral 1. So pretty much what I did is I went into Word, I hit Control F, which opens up your navigation pane in Word, and right down the left-hand side, all of the major sections are right there. So when we talked, y'all share more about signposting, but that's one way that the template was set up to show you some way of signposting. So what you can do is literally open up Control F. I recommend you get more than one monitor if you don't have one already, because you can have one Word document on one monitor and you can have another Word document on another monitor. And what you want to do is open up a blank Word document, a new one, and you want to take the major headers, which are in the navigation pane, and those are going to be your Roman numerals, right? And then what you're going to do is you're going to go into the actual tables that are under the narratives in there, and you're going to look for what is expected of you in terms of drafting that particular section. So in this particular case, number 1, which is A here, the learner provides a detailed description of how the problem space has evolved over time and the effects it has had on the research trend, on research. And then it gives research trends. So here, this particular slide says assessing the rubric criteria. Every learner has to assess themselves. You have a column in which you have to score yourself at 0, 1, 2, and 3. What this does is this helps you give a proper perspective of where you're really, really at. And it also lets you really be honest with yourself about where you're at, and also gauge what you still need to learn. So when I say assess the rubric criteria, the first thing that you see that has to be done in here is the learner provides a detailed description of how the problem space has evolved over time. Well, how do you do that? How do you let us know how the problem space evolved over time? Well, if you are, and you will be, you're going to be using prior research to put that together. The best way that I found to be able to do that is to find the most backdated article that I could that gives a really good support and justification for my problem space of my dissertation. So let's say that first article was in 2012. And then the most recent one that I have is 2019. Now I have about 7 years worth of research. Now, the number of articles that you may have, you're going to have to really, like if you have a large amount, you're going to have to be very intentional about which ones that you use. It can be a little tricky to use the 3 to 5 articles that we have to actually provide the context of our problem space in comparison to this one. So the reason why I bring this up is because you want to really economize and really be intentional about what you're going to use and why you're going to use it. But it needs to be relevant. It needs to properly justify and support your problem space. So when you go to talk about what is known, now here's what I'm going to look at. You're looking at that at how it evolved over time. Okay, that's the major thing that you want to look at. So when you're writing, your committee members is looking for a time perspective. So if you start out by saying, originally or historically or in 2012, so and so and so and so, and then you draw a timeline up, but you also show some evolution in what you wrote. Now you're demonstrating how the problem space has evolved over time. One of the things that I typically see when I'm looking at documents, whether it's in my role as a research faculty manager or as a chair, one of the things that I see is there's this tendency to go provide more need statements. Need statements are more like future research says blah, 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 blah. Okay, to us in a sense that it talks about how the problem space evolved over time, but you have to be really careful that you're not saying this is what needs to be investigated. The primary goal here is to talk about how the problem space evolved over time. And then you got to go back to basic grammar and you have to look at the fact that this first criteria is actually asking for 2 things. And how do you know it's asking for 2 things? After time, there's a comma and the word and. And tells you you need to do 2 things to satisfy this criteria. The second thing that you need to do is the effects it has had on research and the trends. So how did the problem space evolve and what is this trend towards what is needed? Those are the 2 things that you need to do. So that's what I mean by properly assessing the rubric criteria. I'm not going to climb through the rest of them because we would take up too much time in this webinar, but that's what we mean by assessing. All right. So what you see here is one of the strategies that I have used to do some coaching with students. And I'll tell you how it evolved. I've been at GCU for a while and I've served in multiple functions, but it's always been with doctoral studies. And in my previous role, I was a student services counselor. And I used to get calls from students saying that what they wrote, their committee members are not really perceiving it and they think it's something else. And I really couldn't understand what they meant by that because I could only get the student's perspective. When I came over into this role, now I can see more prospectuses and more proposals because I'm working with students to kind of navigate through some of the challenges that they're having. And some of that same commentary started to come up. And then I had a personal experience as a student. I had a committee change. And in that committee change, I learned quite a bit. So here is the cue that I got. My previous chair would say, Tarila, this is good content in this section, but how is it relevant to your study? And she would ask that, and I'll be honest, I didn't know how to answer it. So I'd revise, go back, she'd send it back, not quite there. Then I got a different chair. And the chair would, my new chair would say, yeah, this content is good, but you need to demonstrate how it's connecting to your study. And it hit me. They're saying the same thing, they're just saying it differently. And I would see that same comment in other documents. And then I had to take a step back and do some reflecting. And what I noticed for myself and other students is the first time that we go in to draft something, We just need to get it on the page, right? That's what we need to do. And when we need to get it on the page, we're really looking for what content and what concepts fit this particular area. But there's more to it. So if you see, you got this column with bullet points here, and then you got this 1, 2, 3, 4. What I want you to do is look at the first bullet point, use scholarly resources to draft to show your scientific knowledge in applicable sections. There is a science behind every section. How do you know what that science is? The narratives that GCU put before the rubric criteria, they give you the science. The rubric criteria is the science. So from the bottom, you see number 1, that's that broad sense. That's us getting it on the paper, right? The other thing that you need to do is use scholarly resources to draft and show your research knowledge in applicable sections. So for example, you need to have a good general research knowledge. What does it mean to write in a more qualitative sense and a more quantitative sense, right? That's one thing that I can think of. Another thing, what does it mean to write for a particular design in qualitative research and a particular design in quantitative research? What does it mean to really demonstrate your research knowledge about advancing the scientific knowledge? What does it mean to demonstrate your research knowledge in terms of like practical applications, things like that? And that's the same thing with that science, right? Then taking it up a step further into this, you're going to use scholarly resources to draft and show your knowledge of any applicable of your field of study. Learners, we can do that because that's the baby of it. Unless your baby is your design, and when I say the baby, like the heart of your research or things like that, that's where we can really, really shine through, but it can't overshadow these other areas. And then finally, using scholarly research resources to draft to show your research skills. So there's a difference between showing knowledge and the skill, all right? So this is an introductory webinar. I'm not gonna dig too deep, but you'll get more in future webinars, all right? So there's that. All right, sorry, skip one. All right, so level 2, revise for relevance. So coming back here to this one, real life experience. I would sit down and I would write whatever I could get out of my head, paragraph or a section. And then I go put it down for about 24 to 48 hours and I wouldn't look at it. Our minds, if you look at it too much, that stuff stays in there. So you need to give yourself an opportunity to come back in so you can look at it with a fresh set of eyes. And I would come back. And when I came back, I was revising. And I was revising to do exactly what the committee members were telling me I needed to do. I needed to make sure that I got this content and these concepts in here, but it's relevant to my study and I need to make sure it's connecting. So there's a second level in going into drafting and revising. So the first thing is revising to demonstrate support for the problem space of your study. Everything is built on previous research. That's the heart of your research is the problem space. So everything that you put in there, it needs to support it. The second one, revise to demonstrate justification for the problem space. Now, what's the difference between supporting and justifying it? Supporting it is you're making arguments for your study. Justifying it, however, is taking it and making sure that the need is actually really there. So that's the difference for it. Support, okay, these are the arguments that support this, but justifying it is making sure that everything that you have in there has this logical, defensible way of saying, yes, this is absolutely a problem space that can be looked at with all of these things in there. The next thing is revising to demonstrate alignment of core aspects of the study. So alignment, not necessarily only about using certain words to make sure things fit, but this goes back to research knowledge and research skill. Understanding that everything that you put in there has this common thread in it. And then these core aspects of it, all of them run together. So we'll dig into that more in future webinars. And then next one, revising to demonstrate an ability to understand and conduct. And that should be that you understand and conduct research. I need to revise that. So let me rephrase that one. You need to revise to demonstrate an ability that you to understand and that you can conduct research. Okay. So it's not just about you writing it, but when it comes down to getting past IRB, your D50 milestone, you're going to actually have to conduct the research. So you need to demonstrate that you can do that. All right. And then level 3. So same thing. I will go put it down 24, 48 hours, sometimes longer, depending on how much I wrote, because you're going to get mentally tired. And writing tired never works for anybody. You need to rest. And I will come back to it. Now I'm coming back in and I'm revising again, but I'm being more specific. Now I'm really, really looking at the rubric criteria. So if you notice, we're talking about an outline built on the rubric criteria. Now we're coming into, we're revising based on the rubric criteria. So now you got this sandwich. You're starting with the rubric criteria and you're revising based on that. So what it does is it forces you to pay attention to it. It also, as you do that, when you're working with your committee members, you can have this collegial conversation with them about what needs to be changed and why, because you were very intentional about what you're doing. The better you can communicate with them, the better it is that they can give you feedback and communicate with you about what needs to be improved. So here with level 3, you're going to revise to demonstrate an understanding of research and content knowledge in the rubric criteria. So again, our research knowledge and our content knowledge are in the criteria, right? So you're going back in and revising, making sure that I covered that. We're going to dig a little bit more in just a little bit. And then revise to ensure what is written is organized according to the rubric criteria. Very true story. Because I had written it according to an outline, logically, just like the rubric criteria were in there, I knew which paragraphs were addressing which criteria. So I'm in a Zoom with my chair. She sees something. Tarila, what is this? And I was able to say, I was looking to address this. And I was looking to address this particular criteria to meet this particular content within the criteria. Oh, okay. Well, then you need to look at how you have the terminology here, the way this sentence is structured. Now think about these things. And she was able to give me guidance there and then kind of taught me through some better ways to do that in the future. Another thing that really works well with that is if you're doing that, you can kind of signpost your chair about this paragraph is intended for this, to take some of that vagueness out, right? If I wrote this paragraph for this, you can tell them this was my effort to do this, okay? The next one, revise according to the logic provided in the criteria. Take some time. I tell every student that I get a chance to talk to this, you need to go in DC Network, you need to print the template as is, print it out like it's a research article and keep it next to you. And if you read it on a regular basis, you get familiar with it, you understand it, you'll understand that there's a logic in it. And so you want to follow that logic, okay? Next one, revise to ensure that the language and terminology used and prose appropriately addresses the rubric criteria. What do we mean by prose? So remember, each section has a science to it. Dr. Sandoval can attest to this one because she was there. When I got to chapter 5, I didn't have the appropriate writing prose for chapter 5. And so I was tired. By the time you get to chapter 5, you're pretty tired. I was tired, but I just didn't have it, right? So my logic would break. It would just break up when I wrote. And what she did is she would go in and she would say, okay, look at this, 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 this. And that's what I realized. I wasn't writing it so it had this logical and cohesive coherency in it, but I also, that's what was making me not address the rubric criteria. So if you're looking for like, what are you going to give me right now to help me go through this? You guys literally Google searches. Google is your friend. You can go, and I did it all through my dissertation. What I would type in something like, what's logical flow in a paragraph? I would do things like that, for synthesis. How do I make sure that my arguments are connecting? Everything is in there. How am I making sure I got one idea in the paragraph? Things like that. The same thing with academic prose or writing prose. It's all on Google. You can go and look for it. All right. And then finally, revising to ensure writing is clear, cohesive, defensible in all three of these senses: grammatically, logically, and scientifically. Hard lesson, because it's in our head logically, doesn't mean it always comes out on that paper logically. So you need to make sure these things are there. Okay. Next one. All right. Here going. Okay. So this was the same outline from before, but now we're going to kind of shift gears just a little bit in creating that outline. So I just wanted to revisit that this is one approach that I'm giving here, kind of the main focus here if you decide to use it. So we already talked about assessing it. Now we're moving into actually creating it. So you get this part here together. Okay, well, Dr. Johnson, what else? What else do I put in there? And that's where we're going to go here. All right, so logical paragraphs and sections. What you see here is two different ways to do it, but you're doing the same thing. You're just taking a different avenue of doing it. On the left-hand side, you see here is starting with the topic sentence, and on the right-hand side, starting with your argument. I was not the type of student that could write a topic sentence first. Full transparency. I just couldn't do it. My brain does not work like that. I am extremely detail-oriented. I'm the type of leader that if someone comes to me with something, I'm asking for the details. It's just the way I function. What I could do is I could write the middle of my paragraphs first. So with this first one, you'll see numbers 2, 3, and 4 have the same content, but they're in a different order. So let's start with writing a topic sentence. First things first, you're going to use the rubric criteria as the core idea of that paragraph. We'll go about talk about signposting more in just a little bit. But the main core idea of your paragraphs should be the rubric criteria. Okay. Second thing you're going to do is starting with the topic sentence is you're going to develop a topic sentence that explicitly informs the reader what the paragraph is based on. Very good cue for this. The way we have to write our problem statements. It is not known if. That's a perfect signpost, and that tells exactly if that's the problem statement section, what that section is going to be about. Another thing that I can think of is the part in the dissertation where you have to actually talk about how results are relevant and how they actually support and justify your problem space. So a good way to start that paragraph: results from previous studies, blah, blah, blah. Perfect signpost, right? So that's another way. Those are the things that are coming up off the top of my head. Then the next thing you're going to do is draft 3 to 4 logically structured sentences using relevant citations to address the rubric criteria. These citations must support the core idea. The core idea is the rubric criteria, right? With citations. That's in there twice, you guys. Sorry about that. And then finally, you're going to review, revise, and proofread to ensure logical order and synthesis, and then develop a transition sentence. Again, some students don't work that way. The second thing I could not do right off the bat is develop a transition sentence. I was more on this other side. I could start with my argument. I remember sitting in my office one day, sitting down there for 2 to 3 hours and only coming out with one paragraph, and I was frustrated because that had not been the first time. And I was like, I need to figure this out because I can't do this all the time. And I walked away. I constantly reflected in my dissertation. I have journals. I did it via video. I was constantly reflecting, like, what am I going to do? And one day it hit me. If I'm building all of this on prior research and I'm intentionally choosing which articles I'm going to use for this particular paragraph, then I probably should start there. And that's what I did. I would draft the middle of that paragraph, the middle of the outline, and then I moved to the next one and I draft it. And then I moved to the next one and I draft the middles. And then I do what I just said, 24, 48 hours, I walk away from it, I come back and I look at it. And I would go through that levels 1, 2, 3 process that I just showed you. And I would see, did I really satisfy the rubric criteria to the best of my ability? Now, based on what I have there, now I can work on drafting a topic sentence, because the content in the middle, the paragraph in the arguments need to be in the topic sentence. After I got my topic sentence done for about 3 or 4 paragraphs, I was able to develop my transition sentence. So this is 2 different approaches that you can actually use. Again, this is not one size fit all. You may find that you can interchange these, whatever works for you. All right. So digging in just a little bit more. Well, what would you put in those sentences? So here again, same thing, identification of the problem space. Now, first criterion is A, and then I would just literally, topic sentence would probably be bolded with a semicolon. I draft my sentence in there, draft them in there, and I leave it in the outline. I literally would just leave it in the outline. Once I got it revised to where I thought it was good, I would take whatever was in the semicolon, in the colon, after I put topic sentence or my first source or second source, whatever I was doing. So the center building my argument, I would literally just take that out, and that was my paragraph. I didn't put topic sentence colon, bring it. I would just take what I wrote in there and put it in there. But my outline stayed the same, because what it helped me do is I was able to look at the logic in my paragraphs, and I was able to see, did I really do my best with this? And that's really all you can do. And so if you see B, that's the second criteria, and you would just repeat those steps. So literally when you build your outline, Roman numerals would be your major headers already in the navigation pane. Your capitals A, B, C, D within those Roman numerals are going to be the rubric criteria. And then your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 are going to be the sentences that you're actually putting in there. All right. So then there's that. Move on. Yes, signposting. I'm moving much faster than I thought I would be. All right. So signposting. Signposting is a technique that involves using phrases and words to guide the reader through the content of your dissertation. So you want your committee members to be able to see, okay, clearly that's what they're trying to do. Even if you didn't do it as well as you had hoped, at least they know this is what they were trying to do. So I'm thinking back to, in our content courses, we had a template for writing essays, right? And you had your introduction, and then you had your headers where you had to, that's what you were going to do in your body paragraphs, and then your conclusion, right? That's the way that would look. But here, you're going to still have those headers in there, but this is going to be more focused on the dissertation. So again, outlining your main arguments, main argument, main idea, rubric criteria, but now how do you draft that topic sentence so it shows your reader, this is exactly what I'm trying to do. And then giving them a direction of how you're going to lay out that argument in the paragraph and using opening phrases. So there's some different ways that you can do it. Another way of signposting is linking words or short phrase signposts that include connecting words to help guide the reader through the argument by linking these ideas and sentences together. So here's a perfect example or two. Let's say, for example, your dissertation is on K through 12 education, particularly learning, right? And you want to do it on learning, but you want to talk about how the classroom environment has some sort of impact or influence, or it contributes to learning, right? And that's what you want to talk about in that paragraph. That paragraph needs to stay to that idea. But what if in that you're moving and you're trying to drive to adding these additional concepts in there? That's okay, but conceptually, there still needs to be those connecting words and phrases through there. So in future webinars, what I'll do most likely is present some examples, but this is a way that you can go about doing it. And then finally, another signpost, language, terminology, and prose signposts. They're useful when writing, when you want to ensure your writing is clear, cohesive, defensible, again, back to what we talked about in a grammatical, logical, and scientific sense. So one of the main questions that I get a lot is, how do I ensure that if I'm writing a qualitative descriptive, I don't write in a way that makes my committee members thinking, this is not really a descriptive. This might be a case study. Well, you need to know the language and the terminology. One, qualitatively, and you need to know the language and the terminology of what's different. And because it's qualitative research, you guys, Qualitative research is very flexible, so you need to know what kind of language may be similar and different between the different designs. All right. So next one, these are some of the things that I want to just give some guidance on in terms of proofreading, revising, and editing for logical paragraph and sentence structure. First and foremost, academic writing yields the best examples of topic, support, conclusion, paragraph structure. Topic sentence, support, argument in the middle, conclusion, transition sentence. That's a good structure. Okay. The next one, a good rule of thumb will be to avoid writing more than 5 or 6 sentences in a paragraph before finding a logical place to break. I learned, for me, by the time I'm at a point, because I used to do that, write really long paragraphs that went all into the next page. You shouldn't have a paragraph a page or more longer. I used to do that. And I used to have to take a stop and take a look and see conceptually, where did I shift ideas? So my dissertation had something to do with design thinking. That was one of my theoretical foundations. If I was talking about design thinking, but I was talking about design thinking in a general sense, and then I start talking about the steps, I just took a shift. Now I'm talking about the steps of design thinking. If that paragraph is super long, now it's a good time to open up and start a new paragraph, all right? So what I just talked about there, typically paragraphs are about 3 to 8 sentences, and they shouldn't be a full longer than a full page. So kind of look for some of that stuff. A paragraph will usually consist of a collection of sentences that when considered in a group, they have something in common. So again, the paragraph is about learning and classroom environment. Those are the two things that they have in common: learning and classroom environment. You start talking about something else in there and it's not common with the rest of it, you need to reconsider, does it fit in that particular paragraph? And then structuring sentences effectively is a key of successful academic writing. If a sentence is easy to read, the point or your argument is clear and it makes sense, that's a good sentence. But when sentences get really complex and convoluted and people don't understand what you're saying, that can cause you more time. So I really wish I would have been able to find the article, but I will never forget it. I'm geeky about this stuff, so I would spend hours just finding things. And I remember getting feedback that my sentences were complex and you couldn't understand what I was saying. How do I do that? So I went reading. I don't even remember how I started digging in stuff, but I went in Google Scholar and I just started looking for things. And I found this article that was written in 2001. It was a narrative, and it was a person that had graduated, and they were talking about their experience. And she actually put in the article, because she had documented how much time it took her to get from one milestone or movement to the other. And she had calculated that she had cost herself about 1.5 years just for this reason. She was writing in a very unclear way. Her document wasn't readable. And she said, you need to use a subject, verb, object, sentence structure. Dr. Sandoval and I had a really good conversation about this the other day, and she made a good point, and now I cannot remember the point. So Dr. Sandoval, can you chime in about the difference between a subject and an object?
Oh my, you're putting me on the spot. I think I remember what you're talking about, and it was a really simple sentence. You know, the dog jumped over the fence. So in that sentence, the dog is the subject. The dog is what is acting. So then the verb is jumped, and then the fence is the object. And what we often see is that the order of those is mixed up. And oftentimes sentences have multiple objects, multiple subjects, but the flow of those sentences don't work. And that's what causes the complexity and the lack of clarity in the sentence. And so, in a simple example of turning all of that around would be, the fence was jumped over by the dog. Or, this would be a really bad example, but jumped over the fence, the dog did. Put it into Yoda style. But those are the types of ways that the subject, verb, and object are mixed up. And of course, our examples and dissertations are going to be more complex. But that was the simplest way I could think of to put that. Yes, and Dr. Garrett reminded me that would be the passive voice. So the fence was jumped over by the dog is passive. The dog jumped over the fence is active, and we want to see the more active voice when you're writing.
Thank you. And so when you're looking at this and you're thinking of subject, verb, object, you just need to be humble, like I had to do multiple times. You're doing stuff that you learned way back kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade. And for the first time since you were little, where you had to write a paragraph, I don't know, I'm aging myself here, but it's okay. And you get it, and the teacher put the red pen all over the top of it and give it back to you and tell you to rewrite it and come back. This is the first time you've had to do that in a really long time. And to do it in this way, it's not easy, right? So that is that one. What I do want to do is provide some resources because I covered quite a bit. And these are some of the resources that I have used. I continue to recommend them because they're still, I have them and I still look at them and I still think that they are extremely useful even after graduation. So the first one, Boot and Bile, Scholars Before Researchers. Um, the literature review is the biggest part of the dissertation. It's, for me, it was the most complicated one to get done. But in writing a literature review, because it's the biggest part and a lot of logic and everything needs to go in there, this article is really, really good with helping kind of break some of that stuff down. But again, scholars before researchers. So when we say scholars before researchers, one of the dispositions that you need to have, even if you have no intention on doing research after this, is you are one as long as you're in this process. And so you need to embrace the mindset of going from student to independent scholar. That's a lot of reading. And as I said, I was geeky about it. I'm glad I was, but you need to be too down to some of these most basic things, right? And this helps with that. Booth, Colomb, and Williams, The Craft of Research. I will never forget when I read this book. Game changer for me. Total reset in thinking. Really, again, humbled me and made me realize I don't know what I'm doing. And I need to figure out what I'm doing. And this book really helped with that. One of the things that I remember about this book is defining what's a researchable problem rather than a practical professional problem. And you're doing problem space, and it's a combination of that, right? And so reading that book will help really unpack that. Newman and Kovrig, one of my favorites. You see this building consistency between title, problem statement, purpose, and research questions to improve the quality of research plans and reports? That's alignment. That was the other piece that helped me understand that you're introducing concepts and ideas, and how do you make those connections in them? That article is amazing. Newman actually writes a lot more on this stuff. Just keep in mind that just like there are thought leaders on leadership and everything else, people are actually thought leaders on developing dissertations and writing and doing research. So that's a good place to go for there. Osmond, also one of my favorites. Academic Writing and Grammar for Students. Osmond's book is really amazing because it not only tells you what is good academic writing, he takes the time to slow you down and say, okay, this is a bad example. And then he'll underline and italicize, this part of it is what makes it bad. Now here's the good one and here's why, right? So it gives you all of that. Randolph, I'm pretty sure a lot of you have seen this one, A Guide to Writing the Dissertation Literature Review. Very, very good one. I remember taking a leave of absence just before my RES 861 class, which was the lit review. You guys that are in a different program model, it might be different for you, but that helped me really unpack like writing more towards a qualitative, quantitative, and things like that. So that's a really good one. And then finally, Wallace and Ray, one of my favorites, Critical Reading and Writing for Postgraduates. I have two sayings with this. You can't write something if you don't understand it. You just can't. You're not the only one. It's all of us. Secondly, to critically read your articles, It's not to simply sit there, read it, and figure out what you can pull out of it to plop in your document. You need to critically read it. Okay. And so that one is really good for that. That's a book. So it is now, we got 15 minutes left. Questions. Dr. Sandoval, Dr. Garrett, or Dr. Waldschmidt, any questions came up in the chat that you want to talk through?
One thing that's just come up consistently is the fact of the perspective or the PowerPoint that we have, and where will they be able to access this PowerPoint and or other resources. So we were thinking,
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
the PowerPoint on the DC network.
That sounds good to me.
Perfect. And I believe we have a copy of the participants that are here.
Mhm.
Dr. Sandoval, any idea of where we can find this on the DC network?
Yes, I will drop a link in the chat as to where we will post it. It will be in the dissertation resources that you can find on the dissertation homepage. So I will drop that in the chat in just a moment. I'm also going to launch our post-webinar poll. I'll keep it open until the webinar is over. But again, we just have some questions that we like to ask to help target our future webinars and just gather some good data on the information shared.
Someone is asking about a link to the PowerPoint. I don't have a link to the PowerPoint, but we will actually upload the document to DC Network so you can get it there.
I wanted to add, there was a question about, one person said that they'll begin Res 880 in January, and how does this information help me where I am now? That's a good question. It's going to be very helpful to you because you're going to start preparing. The first thing you're going to do when you get to the 880 class is working on your prospectus and really thinking about, and you'll actually start working on the proposal and putting that together as well. So when you start writing the proposal, you have to think about the structure. You want to develop an outline for your writing so that you know what direction you're going in. You can't, like Dr. Johnson said, you can't just sit down and start writing. You have to know the information that you're going to be writing about, and you know your topic, consider what kind of study you're going to do it and how you're going to put that together. We've given you some good templates. We have the criterion tables within the templates that are going to help you to structure that. But this information that you're getting now is really a good starting point for understanding how you take control of your writing.
And to piggyback off of that, so not only are you going to be doing that, but eventually you're going to have to defend your proposal and things like that. So writing in a paragraph is one thing, but taking what you wrote in those paragraphs out and popping them in bullet points, that's something completely different. So for the PowerPoint, this start with the argument, that's going to be super helpful, right? Because then and that's what it helped me with. When it came down to me taking what I needed to take from my actual proposal, when I had to defend my proposal and putting it in a PowerPoint, I knew where in my paragraphs I could pull things out for that, because the center of my paragraphs were my arguments. And that's exactly how the PowerPoint is designed. So very, very good question. Dr. Waldschmidt, did you have anything that you wanted to add? No. Dr. Garcia, anything for you? No. Okay. So let's see, what were some other questions?
Dr. Sandoval,
go ahead.
Sorry, Dr. Sandoval just posted in the chat. So that is where this webinar is, or the PowerPoint is located. Thank you, Dr. Sandoval.
Someone is asking me how long was my literature review. I'm sorry, Rick.
That was the same question.
Okay. Let's just say the review of the literature was 30 pages. I think when it was all said and done, chapter 2 probably was close to double of that. You want to think about the fact that each section is like a little mini essay within the whole chapter. So the length of it makes a difference to an extent. It's the content in it that really, really makes the difference. The book by Osmond is really going to help for those of us who write really long sentences or put way too much information in there. It's going to really help in terms of being concise, right? So that's that answer to that. But I think it was a little, my dissertation is actually in ProQuest, so you guys can go look at it. I might have the link here in just a second. I'm pretty sure I sent it to someone earlier, so I can get that. And we have a question about, writer's block. We had 2 questions on writer's block. Writer's block is normal. It happens to everybody. The example that I gave where I'm sitting down multiple times and I'm hours and I'm not getting anything out. You need to stop and rethink how you're approaching your writing, right? In a previous webinar, and I may have to revisit that again, but I introduced some topics of really just taking a step back and reflecting on what you're doing. Reflection is key. I thought I was doing too much when I was reflecting in my proposal phase, but then I learned when I got in chapter 4 and chapter 5, that habit was extremely effective because I was able to take a step away from the document and really think about what was missing. But that needs to be a habit of practice. So since that question has come up so many times, I will consider writer's block, but I don't know how successful I'm going to be at giving you stuff because writer's block is so normal and is individualized, but I'll definitely consider it.
We had a question that actually, I'm going to have Dr. Garrett answer that if you don't mind. We had a question about more information on next week's webinar as well.
Mm-hmm.
So next week, we're going to be talking about the different resources that the College of Doctoral Studies Office of Dissertations has made available to you to help you to write your proposal and your dissertation. We put a lot of thought and work behind making sure that you have the right tools to be successful in the program. And so I'm going to be talking about how to use those tools effectively in your journey. And we'll be talking about the dissertation milestones guide, using the dissertation milestones guides to help you to understand what the expectations are. We'll be talking about using the dissertation more on how to use the dissertation the criterion tables to help you write your proposal. More about using more tips on writing and the resources that you can use to improve your writing. Free resources. So
someone had a question about their top extending back centuries. I'll let my peers also piggyback off of this, but my head goes into, if you're going to talk about the problem, how it evolved over time, maybe one small paragraph, bringing like I guess a century or decade type evolution going forward, and then another paragraph to make it more recent. I guess that's the best way that I can think of to do it. But you got to think about the fact that you need recent research. So if you need stuff between 3 to 5 years, talking about stuff that happened 2 centuries ago, yeah. So that's the only way I can think of it, is 2 paragraphs, one more century decade focused to drill it into something more current, and then that second one bringing it in more recent. Did I do well with everybody? Okay, I get nods.
I'm going to add to that is that you're addressing 2 different criterion with that. One is the history, bringing forward the history of the topic, and then the other is talking about what's happened recently. And so you want to think about it from that perspective. And think about a timeline and what major events have happened to add to what major contributions have been made to the literature during the time. You'll have some topics that somebody may have brought in that, like you said, are centuries old. You don't want to discuss everything that happened over the centuries. Just look at some key changes to what happened in the literature. You know, like in the 1700s they may have been doing this, in the 1900s they were doing this, and right up to 2020, this is how it's evolved to now to where I'm at. How has it gotten to where you're at?
And to piggyback off to Dr. Garrett's point, if you're going to be looking back that far, make sure it's relevant. If you're talking
Yes.
about stuff and it has no relevance to your study, it's not even beneficial to put it in there. It'll actually cause more questions than answers, which I think that would be another little nugget. If you're writing in a way where it causes more questions than answers, just think about that, right? You really want to write in a way where it leads to, oh, okay, I see. Okay, that connects, I see. But if you're writing stuff back in the 1800s and it has nothing to do with your topic, or it doesn't really get you to that point where people understand where you're going, I don't know if it would be useful to even include it in there.
Right. And I would add to that that remembering that in your review of the literature section, this is your defense for why you need to conduct your study. So if it's not defending that, then it's probably not, you probably don't need it there.
Um, an appropriate outline for problem space for correlational studies. Everything that was here was useful, but that would be more of a committee related question. So if you have a committee, I'm going to kind of steer you over there. But what you got here can be used even for correlational studies. And then there's another one. The second one from about information that is
With the
passed.
military, in the military.
Okay. Yeah, go
I
ahead.
can take that one because I'm dealing with a student who is actually doing his study on military. And the military has a lot of resources that are available that you can use to support it. And you really want to really be specific about make it specific about your topic and not about the history of the military. You want to narrow it down to your topic. And you can, there's actually a couple of journals out there that he found information to support his study that are military journals, and they're published, peer reviewed.
All right, you guys. So while everybody was talking, my brain actually allowed me to multitask. The link to my dissertation is in the chat. I was like, am I going to be able to get it? So we got about 5 minutes left. Did anybody have anything that they wanted to add? No? That means we did pretty good. All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming. Please attend Dr. Garrett's webinar next week, even if you think you got it together there, you never know what you might learn. Dr. Garcia's is coming up soon, and then we got Brian Longcar's coming as well. So take advantage of these over the next few months. We are doing these because we have heard you and we know you have needs, and we're trying to meet those. Dr. Garcia, you took yourself off of mute. Go for it.
If I can just make a plug for my presentation that will be coming up at the end of the month. I'll be focusing specifically on moving from the 10 strategic points to the prospectus PowerPoint. So for those of you that are still developing your prospectus, please plan to join me for that webinar. Those of you who are beyond the prospectus, it probably would not be very helpful for you. So please be sure to watch for the webinars that are posted on the DC network and come to all of them. Come every month if you want to learn more. But we'll definitely be doing this through the end of this year.
There was a question about language for design. Your best way of learning language for your design and methodology, reading articles. That's really your best way. Gather about 10, 15, 20 qualitative ones, put them together, read them. So you can get some, okay, that seems pretty consistent. Same thing with quant. If you want to take the 20 that you pull together and separate them out. Okay, here are all the narratives, here are all the case studies, here are all the descriptives. read them in that way. That's the best way that you can do it. There is no centralized place where you can find that. And actually that's a developmental skill that all of us need. So yeah, that would be the best way to do that. All right, we have 2 minutes left. Colleagues, thank you. Thank you again, students, for coming. No, there won't be anything specifically on qualitative. We haven't planned anything for that.
I did see a question where someone asked about dealing with race and studies dealing with race and equality, and is this a sensitive point? It is a sensitive point, but if you're writing it from a positive perspective, then you can do it. I have a learner who is just starting and she's doing something on this topic, and so far she's developed a perspective and done a really good job of what she's trying to put, the point she's trying to make. You're not trying to do anything political. It's what you're adding to the literature. What do they say is missing from the literature on this topic, and and how are you going to address that in your study?
And to add to Dr. Garrett's point on that, the APA manual has a chapter on writing objectively. Academic and scholarly writing is written in an objective manner. So you need to also learn how to write objectively. But the specifics to that, again, that would be a committee question. So if you have a committee, make sure you're talking to your committee about your concerns there. But writing objectively will be the best approach there. All right. So we're getting questions in, and same thing with trustworthiness. You got to go do some reading on trustworthiness so you can get your mind wrapped around what that is. And then you'll figure out that writing and the concepts and the type of content that needs to be put in there. So again, all of this that you got here, it can be used anywhere in your dissertation. These are really, really good questions, you guys. All right, so we are going to end the webinar here. Thank you for coming. And we'll stop the recording.